Undivided Bridge podcast, a congregation of young voices from the neighborhoods of Chicago who wants to close the gap between people who may never cross paths otherwise. As the modern world continues to change rapidly, we must adapt together as a city. So, on this podcast, we have conversations about anything that affects our everyday life, how we eat, how we learn, how we create, and how we plan for the future. So, join us on this journey as we discover more about the communities around us and to do our part to talk solutions for the greater good.
Hello and welcome to episode 2, Hunger in the City. So happy you guys have me here. My name is Zoe, aka Zai, from the Austin community, 22, and I'm here with...
I'm Philissa. I am also from the Austin community, and today's episode is all about the food distribution in Chicago. And so we have 3 remarkable guests here to talk about what they do in the industry. Please introduce yourself, guys. We're so happy to have you here, and please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi, my name is Dorin, McIntyre. The community affectionately calls me Pastor Mac. I have a church in the North Austin community, Executive Director of What About Us Charitable Enterprises. Also work with the 25th District Faith-Based subcommittee and do a lot of different things in the community, specifically around food, when it comes to just meeting people where they are, making sure that our seniors are being connected, our youth are being connected to food, and others that have those needs, meeting them where they are to help them get where they're going. Quickly, our 4 areas of concern is our youth. We also do violence prevention with different convening activities in the Austin community. We definitely work with the food desert situation. And then last but not least, it's just like a holistic approach to making sure people are getting to their next. So yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Michele Zurakowski. I'm the CEO at Beyond Hunger. I have lived in Oak Park for the past 20 years. I have the pleasure of working with both of these gentlemen in collaborative programs. The Beyond Hunger has a variety of programs. We're a direct service hunger provider and serve 13 residents of 13 zip codes. So we do a lot of work with partners in Austin, and I think we'll talk more about that as we get going.
Definitely, pleasure to be here. Pleasure to sit here with all of you all. Thank you all for all that you do. My name is Anthony Clark. I'm a public high school teacher. I teach at Oak Park Northwest High School. Originally from the south side of Chicago. My parents moved me to Oak Park when I was a youth. I founded a nonprofit in 2016 called Suburban Unity Alliance. So I'm the founder and director of SUA. And we do a lot of equity work. Anything that involves equity, we generally involve ourselves in. And about 2 years ago, we got into further addressing or helping to address in a collaborative effort, mutual aid effort, food insecurity. So we run multiple community refrigerators that provide free access to food on a 24/7 basis because we truly believe that no one should go hungry. Access to food should be a human right. Healthy food, not just food, but healthy food should be a human right. So that's been extremely successful, running the refrigerators in Oak Park. My most favorite fridge is the one that we have in front of Chairman Fred Hampton's childhood home in Maywood, Illinois. So we do a lot of work with the Black Panther Party Cubs. And also we do a music festival, with Beyond Hunger and others. So that the second annual music festival will be this summer called Food Aid 2023, where again we focus primarily on food insecurity and supporting wonderful organizations like Beyond Hunger and Beyond that work to collaboratively address it.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
It's really nice to know that there's so many different efforts being put towards food security because, like you said, it shouldn't be a human right. It shouldn't be something we struggle against. It should be something because essentially we need food every single day. That is what literally keeps us alive. So I just thank you all for all the time and dedication you put towards your own organizations and just working with the community to do what you do. So we want to dive a little deeper, with each of you, and we want to start with you, Anthony. I'll let folks
Yeah, so basically, I also wanted to comment about how y'all guys collab. That's really amazing to see, the unity come together and whatnot. But back to Anthony, we have a question which is, tell us about your efforts to set up the community fridges, and how did you get started in Oak Park? How did that
For
go
sure.
about?
I'm a quote person. I know a lot of people love quotes, but growing up, I didn't really I would say my high school experience didn't really expose me to a lot of the ills that the world faces. That responsibility fell on my parents. So shout out to Ron and Blanche. Love you all. Hope you all are doing well. But they exposed me to a lot of different issues that exist in our society. And I think moving from the south side of Chicago, the Morgan Park area, moving from essentially poverty into a community like Oak Park as first as renters, it's surprising. It's almost a cultural shock. Seeing a community like Oak Park, a diverse community, but a relatively predominantly white community, have so much.
Right.
And then when you grow up with so little, you're often shocked and you start to ask questions. When you're young, you don't necessarily know the answers to those questions. And then as I continue to mature and, getting out in the community, kicking it with the homies and different things of that nature, you also see Austin, where literally one block separates opportunity from often despair or lack thereof. And when you start to make those connections and you go into Austin and you look into Austin, the people aren't different. People care about their community just the same. People love their families just the same. But people work hard just the same. So why are there so many disparities and differences between communities like Oak Park and Austin? So that was always in my mind. I was always thinking about that. And as a youth, a black male growing up in a community like Oak Park, oftentimes, whether it be police or anyone in the community of authority, they didn't even consider me from Oak Park. When they would approach me or come in contact with me, whether I was playing basketball or hanging with friends, they always assumed, I was from Austin. So then you further identify that there's a wall built up. It's not made of concrete, it's not made of brick, but it's oftentimes made of beliefs and policies. It's made up of practices that exist. And yes, you see some physical forms, the one-way streets, the cul-de-sacs, the barriers that exist between the communities to make it harder to get over. But that's an issue. And when you realize we're all humans, struggle is a universal language. Instead of walls, there should be bridges. And the cycle that exists, I'm not going to get too deep on that because I know we don't have that much time, but the cycle that exists, historically, that was by design, by our governments, to create poverty, to create despair, and predominantly impact disproportionately black and brown people, like in communities like Austin. If it was man-made or person-made, it could be person-solved, and that's how I truly felt, because this is not by accident. So the answer should be by purpose. So just started the nonprofit in 2016. Initially, food insecurity wasn't our primary focus, but when you talk about inequity, the issues are nuanced and interconnected. So you just can't focus, say, on gun violence without thinking about what lack of opportunity does, without thinking about what lack of jobs does. So food insecurity became a primary focus through just identifying those interconnected issues that exist, and as well as being a teacher, a professor as well. So many students on free and reduced lunch. How can we expect them to learn Shakespeare, quote Ernest Hemingway, on an empty stomach if they're hungry? It's ridiculous. So working with the Black Panther Party Cubs, of course, hopefully most of us understand the free breakfast program that the Black Panther Party created. Of course, they were vilified, demonized, and murdered, many of them incarcerated, but our government stole that idea. And now that's why you have free and reduced lunch in these schools. Just trying to take it further. So at the end of the day, I ended with how we got into food insecurity, primarily the community fridges, is in the social media age, in working with youth, too often I feel like we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing this work? Like, what is the purpose? Is the purpose to elevate ourselves? Is the purpose to obtain a title? Is the purpose to be individually celebrated? Or is the purpose truly to help someone? And I think one of the main issues I've often seen with food insecurity outreach or mutual aid outreach is there's never anonymity. Because there's a lot of stigma attached to needing help. Too often, so many people are in need, but because of being judged or because of having to be in public or have your picture taken or be paraded out, like, look who we're helping, oftentimes people deny the benefits that exist. And, food insecurity impacts everybody, Democrat, Republican, young, old, man, woman, they, rich and poor, or starting out rich and poor. So I have individuals in Oak Park with huge homes with empty refrigerators, and then I have people experiencing homelessness that need help. So it's just been a huge benefit, launching the refrigerators. We help so many different people, and then just taking it further, working with Beyond Hunger and the Food Aid music festival that we do. It's just natural, and I said I love quotes. So the quote that I forgot to mention earlier is like, service to others is the rent we pay for room on this earth. And that's from the late great Muhammad Ali. I actually have it tatted on me, the rent I pay. So I have a level of privilege even as a black male in society. My parents worked hard, provided me with a home. So there's somebody out there with less than me. So my responsibility is to not only, of course, take care of me and my own, but if we're going to move forward as a society and if we're going to address these issues, we have to work together. So that's just what it is, and that's what we try to do. So that's why collaboration is so important. That's why education is so important, and that's why the outreach is so important.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was very inspiring, like to hear about you identifying and seeing and observing the differences, and that like sparked you to become the powerful person you are today. So,
I appreciate that.
I'm gonna go to you, and we're gonna ask the next question.
I feel the same. I'm very appreciative of like how spirited you are about it, because you're looking at every single aspect. From, like you said, like when you just said about how people in Oak Park, those big houses, I'm so jealous of those big houses, but you just said sometimes they have empty fridges. It's like there are more levels to the infrastructure that we're not always seeing, and it's like your beliefs will like work, your perception of how everything works. So I just think it's so important to think about every single aspect, that's there in the problem. So I appreciate you and like what you're doing.
Yes.
And I found it a little funny when you said you like quotes, because as I was doing research on you, I actually found a quote from the website for Suburban Alliance. So your first sentence for your like statement is, "I hereby agree to hold myself accountable and not remain neutral in the fight for equity." And I was going to ask, why is food itself an important aspect in the fight for equity?
Definitely, because again, as I stated earlier, the issues are interconnected. So when we talk about inequity that exists, when we look at a community like Austin, again, lovely people in Austin, they deserve everything anybody deserves. But when you have a median household income, I'm not going to have the exact figure, but say around roughly $35,000, and then you cross literally a street, and your median household income goes up to about $82,000. Then you go further in the River Forest, you're up to $100,000. Again, you have to start asking yourself why. The people aren't necessarily different. Yes, the experiences may need to be different based upon the proximity to poverty, but the people are the same. They want the same thing everybody wants: love, safety, care, raise a family, so on and so forth. So again, food insecurity is another interconnected issue that allows the cycle to continue. When we're talking about enslavement of people, when we're talking about that ending, but oppression not ending, it just shifts to Jim Crow, to black codes, to the KKK, to redlining. This is again by design. And what happens is, for a community to uplift itself, you have to be able to invest in this community, right? It deserves investment. But what if you don't have a grocery store? What if you don't have healthy food options? What if you have corner stores, but nobody who owns that corner store actually lives or cares about the community? You know what I'm saying? So you have to take your money outside the community you love just to survive. So a community like Oak Park benefits from a community like Austin experiencing further struggle, because people have to grocery shop in Oak Park. They go to the Pete's. They go to the other 5 or 6 grocery stores that we have, so they can have access to fresh food. And not to say fresh food doesn't exist in Austin. Of course it does. We have wonderful people doing work, but the people are doing the work. We don't have the companies. We don't have the organizations. We don't have the major investments. So just trying to work to not only put a Band-Aid over it, because again, the community fridges aren't the answer. It's just a response to the issue. But if we could utilize that response to further educate and to further bring together, hopefully we can eventually get to the root cause issues and further educate individuals in Oak Park who are often ignorant, who are to the issues that exist, never go east into Austin. You know what I'm saying? They stay in their little bubbles oftentimes. So what does it mean to have, and what does it mean to not have, and how does that further benefit you? So just tapping into food insecurity, showing individuals that individuals of all background experience it, and what would it mean for a community like Austin to have a multitude of grocery stores, to have access to fresh produce like many of the small organizations are providing. But why can't we have large organizations doing that? Why does it have to be so much work and effort from people like us to make this happen? So just trying to tap into food insecurity, because again, I think at the end of the day, you can't fight anything if you're hungry. You know what I'm saying? So all these interconnected issues that exist, first and foremost, we need our people healthy. We need them fed. And again, not to get deep because I can go on, but we also know health issues that exist, the racism that exists in healthcare. And because people that look like me often don't have access to healthy foods, we're eating processed foods. I have so many students for breakfast, they eat Flamin' Hots and Takis, and that's not healthy. That's not feeding this. So, I mean, at the end of the day, just trying to, again, attack an area, an interconnected issue that I believe will further allow us to attack the further issues.
Thank you so much for that. You should have your own podcast, sir,
Yeah,
because
no.
I know you have some wisdom. Like, I mean, you're spitting right now. And, like, I know we don't have much time.
No,
but
I thank you. This is
You
y'all
didn't
thing.
roll so many questions up in
Right.
me, but I will, wait till the questions
Right,
later
right.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
But we do have to pan over to Pastor Mac. We have a couple questions for you. And so we have a quote from Feeding America in 2021. According to that, nearly 20% of Black individuals have experienced food insecurities, more than 3 times that rate of households. What inspires you to assist with food distribution in Austin?
Thank you. Again, thank you for this opportunity to be here with these great people. I'm humbled to be here. I never take myself too high to thinking I'm better or greater than anyone, so I'm just really grateful. But when you think about it, I grew up in a home where I never ever experienced home. We were not rich, but we were never hungry. And that's because people made sure that food was on the table, however they got it, right? We teased a lot about, this, they call government cheese, right? And the many things that you could do with government cheese and how many different ways we were able to manage eating off of what we had. Never felt that struggle. I didn't feel hunger pains until my first year of college. My stomach growled and it scared me. I didn't even know what it was. Not that I grew up in a rich household, none of that, but the reason why I think it's important to me, because I think that's where peace comes from, the dinner table. When our children were younger, I remember we moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Austin, and we didn't have room in the kitchen for a kitchen table. And one of our daughters, we were in Walmart, and she asked, could we buy this card table? And I'm like, why? She's like, well, then, Daddy, we could eat as a family again. So, and it clicked in my mind, like, that's the most important part of family structures. To answer your question specifically, having a dinner table set is where everything happens, right? Where you hear the hearts of your family, where exchange of ideas, birth of new opportunity, everything kind of happens at the dinner table. To this day, we have a rule, even all our kids are grown and grandkids are coming out, where no phones are allowed at the table. No texting, no calling, no answering, no looking at watches. The dinner table is sacred, whether we're in a restaurant or whether we're in a home. So it's so important to me to create and connect that culture of what happens at the dinner table and talking about a person's day and the peace that comes there. There's kind of like if you spoke earlier about like, any type of divide is removed because everybody is doing something of common thought. They're eating, right? Laughter comes out of that. Joy comes out of that. And some of your greatest moments come from the dinner table. You even think about your own life. People usually get their food and go in a different room, but the dinner table is just really a space to me that always had me to think about if I ever could be in a situation to help someone. So to go to that part about why that inspires me, because I think every family, no matter how much money you have or don't have, the dinner table should be set in every home. It should be an opportunity. Healthy food, whatever you can come up with, because not everyone can get a lot of things, and that's where I began to be inspired to try to connect people to healthier choices. But that should be an opportunity in every home. You should be able to walk in anyone's home, and at some point in the day, dinner table should be set, breakfast table should be set, lunch table should be set, and just love is being birthed out of that time.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for that. I actually heard that wise advice from a neighbor of mine. Shout out Miss Dolly. But no, she told me that the problem is that we took out the dinner table in the family, and to hear that reiterated is very motivating, and to basically showing us that we need to go back to some already set traditions and whatnot.
That statement that you mentioned earlier about how you were lucky enough to have food on the table, you were never hungry, and then your first experience with that was only in college. I feel similarly because I didn't go off for college, but at the same time, my family isn't super rich, but I've also never had that problem with hunger. But when I go outside in the community, you can kind of see there are people struggling to eat and find their meal of the day. And it's just mind-boggling how different it can be in each household, next to each other. I know the house next to me might be struggling, and then the other house might be okay. And it's just wonderful to know that you're trying to look out for every single person that you can in the community. Because I did work with you last year as well with Chris, volunteering, handing out flyers to get people to come and get their groceries so they could have something to eat. And so I want to ask you, how do you encourage families to be more food conscious? Because like you said, not everyone has the opportunity to get the things they need, but how do you still try to encourage that? Because health, plays a role in that.
No, thank you for that question. I think one of the things is doing things with integrity or helping people to feel empowered. When people struggle, we shouldn't necessarily lead with the fact, I know you need it, so you should come and get it. But more or less doing it in a way that people can keep their dignity. I remember growing up, when we would always have food, and everyone around us did. You could see friends hang out your house a little bit longer because they could smell the pots. So then we would make sure that, as my grandmother made sure everyone ate. And I think that just kind of transcended through me, somehow spiritually or whatever it did. So my goal is to make sure that everyone has what they need. Even people who may say have food in their refrigerator, what's wrong with helping somebody to save 30 or 40 or 50 bucks? So now they can go and buy something that they usually can't buy or afford because someone is giving them, something. So just going out and helping people to connect them to resources has always been kind of my mindset. But it became this somehow, right? And they say when the student's ready, the teacher will show up type deal. I think that's a quote. And for me, it's that when you have to be intentional about finding people who have a need, but not necessarily making people feel bad because they have them.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's funny because there's just so many parallels in life. It's like I was talking to a friend of mine, and she mentioned that restaurant is actually like from the lit, like the British part, basically saying like you give your rests to like the people, like you sell them and make sure everybody eat, or you just give them away. But like it's good to hear like our positive roots are like coming back in to make sure everybody's eating, because you can't do nothing on an empty stomach. And so we're gonna pan to our lovely Michele, and our question for you is: explain the hunger crisis in Chicago and why it's important. It's an important aspect for food equity. Yeah. Why is it important to have food equity in Chicago? Yeah.
Well, thank you again for inviting me to this. I mean, I'm so honored to be part of this with these guys because they're so amazing. I want to, since you all started with a personal thing, I don't usually get all personal, but I'm going to. So I actually grew up with hunger in my household, and sometimes that school lunch, thank you, Black Panthers, was the biggest meal that I had that day. So for me, it comes from this kind of personal place of getting a lot of help from neighbors and family, and wanting to pay that forward in a way. And I think that I had an easier time of it in a lot of ways. My parents were educated, they just had spotty employment. And so once things settled down, it got a little more, food became more plentiful. And because we were white and well educated, we had opportunities that don't exist for lots of Chicagoans. So I think the crisis of hunger in Austin is different than the crisis my family faced. But the result is similar for individuals. But the way out is not the same. So in Chicago, all in all, there's about 800,000 people who struggle with hunger every year. 1 in 3 of those people are Black, and about 1 in 3, a little over 1 in 3 are Latinx. So it's differently proportioned to what our racial proportion is, right? And a lot of that has to do with systemic racism, and that's something that that my sector, the food pantry sector of the world, is really coming to realize. That we always saw these connection points around poverty and unemployment and food insecurity, right? That's pretty evident to everybody. And even issues of disability. Families that have a member with a disability within them are much more likely to be hungry. People who have a household member who has been incarcerated, much more likely to be hungry. and so those we didn't used to think about those necessarily as being related to systemic racism, but now we're really seeing, if you look at the war on Black people, that has a prison population 5 times the rate of Black incarceration as white incarceration, you begin to see that some of these things are built by us. And that's what's created the food crisis in Chicago. Not lack of employment, not necessarily lack of education, but this kind of systemic disinvestment in certain communities and policies that are set up to create pathways for some people, like my family, and not other people. So that's the general crisis, I think. What was the second part of the question?
The second part was basically about like the equity, like why is it important to pay attention to the equity of hunger?
Just that, because you're not going to solve hunger by handing out bags of food. I mean, that's my business. We figure out different ways to get food to people who need it, but that's not going to solve hunger. Yeah. We're going to solve hunger by dismantling systemic racism.
Yes, that's on that.
I think I'm taking in the fact that you said earlier about how it's 800,000 people experiencing this in the city. And I don't know, I guess for me, I see it most evidently when I go downtown to see people who are homeless or people who are struggling. Yes, they're just, it was Sunday. I'm sorry, I can't remember what day it is. This past weekend, I went out downtown with a couple of friends to see a show. And on my way home, I saw someone just sitting on the side, and this girl came up to this man handing out like a nutrition bar. And I don't know, it's just like her face was so warm. She like, it was so evident she would like wanted to help him. And I'm thinking, I'm like, he shouldn't even be struggling. Like I shouldn't be seeing this, you know. Like, I mean, she did help him, but it's crazy. He was a Black man. He was a Black man struggling. So I just think that it's really hard to understand how we can grasp this, you know. So like I look up to you three, you know, talking about making these moves to make sure, like you said, it's not the solution, but it is, like you said, a response to it, you know, what you guys do to help and do your part with what you can. And it is making a difference. I know that it's affecting people and that it is trying to lessen that number. So I wanted to ask you though, specifically when it comes to Austin and Oak Park, what is your kind of ideal on how to make it look similar, how to make the food crisis not as severe, because like you said, Black people do experience like the brunt of the issue because it is systemic. Like what is your ideal on how we can start moving towards equity between the two neighborhoods?
Well, some of it has to do with coalition building, and so some of the work that we all do together I think is really important in that regard. But really it's important to listen to what people want. So I've learned this message from being on the wrong side of assuming I know what people need, because I experienced hunger, so your hunger must be like my hunger. And I'm almost always wrong when I think that. So I'm going to just give you a silly example, that during COVID, we used to have this food pantry in Oak Park where people came in and shopped. It was fantastic, like a great big grocery store, and people could pick up their own food. And we thought that that's what people wanted, was to be able to pick up your own food. That was really the most important thing. So then COVID hits and we can't have people inside anymore. Remember, everybody had to do outside. So we moved to this model where people were, we were packing boxes and putting them into trunks, and people would drive away. So we decided we were going to ask people, when COVID ends, how do you want to receive food? Do you want to go back and shop? Do you want to drive through, or do you want to go online and order something and create your own box? And so I thought everybody would want to create their own box. And then the next thing is they'd want to come in and shop. And the last thing people would want is have a box of food put in their trunk. And I was absolutely wrong. It was exactly the opposite. People wanted the box in the trunk. And then they wanted to shop, and then ordering online was just such a pain, they didn't want to deal with that. So I just have to be aware of my own assumptions, and that doesn't speak for everyone. So one of the things that we do is work in collaboration. Ask people, you know, Pastor Mac, you've got this connection with the community. What's your community want? How can we help? And he's like, well, we've got a lot of people that need home delivery. Can we figure out a way to connect them to your program? Yeah. So we're all part, I think you are too, of Austin Eats, which is a collaboration, right? And so one of the things that one of the partners did was do a survey in Austin, like what do you need around food? And one of the things that came up was nutrition education. And we're like, oh, we do nutrition education. So we started this program called the Health Ambassadors. Pastor Mac helped us recruit one of the members. So we had this 6 weeks training program. Those health ambassadors are now going out within the community, within their churches and organizations, and passing on the knowledge. Because that's something that the community wanted. And we're like, okay, we got the resources, we can help provide that. And so moving it forward. I think one of the last things I wanted to talk about was we recently signed the Good Food Purchasing Pledge. We're the only food pantry in the country to do that. Pretty proud of that. And it has to do with really trying to create a more just food system. So looking at not just the cheapest food that you can get, but looking at nutrition, looking at workers' rights, looking at animal welfare, those kinds of things. So part of our commitment to that is actually using some of the purchasing power that we have to support local businesses. So so we work with 40 Acres, which is a local grocer, right? Dion's Chicago Dream, who is based out of Inglewood, Growing Home, also out of Inglewood, and then we work with a local farmer a little up north called Alden Farms. But just a way of, instead of using our purchasing power to buy the cheapest food we can, to really help support the infrastructure within the community.
Yes, thank you.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful to hear, because we haven't even gotten to that aspect of like agriculture and like where our food is coming from as well. And
that's important.
That's a whole nother industry basically, you know, that ties into it. But just that decision itself to not, focus on getting the cheapest product, but also the best and local product for our people, so we can really insulate where our revenue is going and where our support is going as well.
Yes, that quality over quantity, but we want the quantity as well too.
Right.
But I want to thank you guys for being so vulnerable with us today, and like actually telling us about your backstory and like what motivated y'all to, make a change in the community. Which this leads me to basically ask our final banger question. Anybody can answer. My question for you is, what are your future endeavors of, y'all programs, and how do you see yourself combating these programs that we are under? Anybody can start.
I mean, that's actually a great question, because the problems aren't ending. I have a analogy I like to utilize. So I think for me, let me give the analogy and then finish with what I'm trying to focus on. I tell people, like, if you look out your window, you see a neighbor in a time of need, and you don't open your door because you're not currently in need. Sure, you may be good that day, the next week, the next month, the next year, but eventually you will be in need, but there will be no one left to open their door for you. And I think, again, when we talk about systemic issues and the by design nature of things that exist, people being divided is a benefit to those in power. People being divided is a benefit to the 1%. Poverty is lucrative to some, while of course people living in poverty aren't rich, but poverty makes people rich. Don't get it twisted. So for me, it's how can we move further into communicating to individuals. Yes, today food insecurity is not impacting you. You may be middle class, you may consider yourself successful, but unless you're part of that 1%, understand that by the time they're done dealing with black folk who disproportionately are impacted by the majority of the ills in this world, who do you think is next? By the time they're done dealing with people experiencing homelessness, we're seeing, minimum wage federally hasn't changed, but inflation continues to increase. What is even the middle class at this point? So I think for me, it's continuing to do the work, continuing to operate the community fridges, putting on the food aid concerts, but again, those are responses. So from a proactive standpoint, just collaboratively working with others to try to build those bridges, metaphorically and physically, and to have people like in Oak Park to understand. Yes, you may not be experiencing it today, but that doesn't mean you won't experience it tomorrow. And I'll finish with, I think we're seeing it in reference to like downtown Chicago. Of course, there's a lot of fear mongering that exists. There's a lot of false narratives that are being created. But now our youth, are taking trains downtown because again, they lack opportunity. They don't have community centers. They don't have job outreach and so on and so forth. So what are they going to do? But for far too long, places like the Magnificent Mile downtown Chicago operated as if it was on an island. They're immune to the issues, but you're never immune. Eventually, it's going to spill over.
Yeah.
You're never immune. So I think that's just my focus, just working with people to understand that you need to give now and help now before your ass needs help. Excuse my language.
Okay.
Okay, that's true.
Say what you said.
Thank you. Either of you?
Yeah, I'll just jump in really fast. I think the mission of Beyond Hunger is harnessing the power of communities to end hunger. And when you ask how can we make Oak Park and Austin more similar, my first impulse was that they're different, and the solutions are different, and the assets are different. And so there are lots of community assets in Austin, and it's recognizing that and tapping into that in a way that respects what the community wants is really important. During COVID, for instance, we set up in Berlin a pop-up food pantry specifically for immigrant families because they were really afraid to come to a food pantry because they had to show ID. So that was a barrier to food access. So we had to have a different solution there that represented that community's wishes.
Right.
So to me, that's the way forward, is understanding and being part of community rather than trying to impose my ideas about how people might want to have food.
Yes. Thank you.
When you think about the name of our organization, I think that's what really brings the whole thing together. What about us? And that can just go across any line you can think of. I consider myself this spoon in this pot. We talk about collaboration, but the spoon is probably the most important part of the pot, because without stirring all the ingredients, all of the various organizations, all the various people, and serving, no one gets what they need. Can you imagine a room where everyone has a spoon that can reach across the table, but they're still trying to feed themselves? Right? You have more chaos in the room. So the opportunity to really bring people together and do the heavy lifting, and not be afraid to point out that people who say they're doing things that are not, and bringing that out and letting them know I'm going to do that, and not be fearful of that, but at the same time do the heavy lifting of really bringing all of us together, because all of us have abilities. You talked about earlier about not, trying to impose thoughts on people or letting people think for themselves and be listening partners and all of that. When you do things like that, you help yourself get to where you're going.
Yes. You want to close out? Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. You guys are really poetic with
Yes.
your wording.
It's the imagery for me.
Right, it's the imagery for us. Thank you all for sharing your time, sharing your knowledge.
Yes, thank you.
And continuing to giving back, like you said, paying forward. You want to pay forward what you've been given when you were young, what you discovered, and now that energy is just moving forward through your own actions. So we just appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you.
Can't wait to see what else you guys do in the future. We're here to support as well.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. Y'all have been a pleasure and truly are inspiring. So, yeah.
Feelings mutual. Thank you all for
Absolutely.
listening.